everyone. Welcome to our Sunday morning meditation class. As I mentioned, most weeks we've had a class for more than 20 years in the morning. I started teaching in 2000, and the class is sponsored by the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, IMCW, founded by Tara Brach 25 plus years ago, and lots of smaller sanghas, communities around the greater Washington area, and now, many folks joining us online, particularly post-COVID. So on behalf of IMCW and also the Center for Mindful Living, which was kind of a component, a sub-community, if you like, within the Insight Meditation community. We had a center in Tenley Town, but like many centers had to let go of it after a couple of years of COVID. But it's a very, very welcoming and vibrant online community, not just online community, but still doing a lot of things online, but more and more things in person as well. So we'll hear a bit more at the end about upcoming activities and, the website where you can check out just a wide range of things, from obviously meditation classes like this one, and the morning classes and the afternoon and evening classes, as well as, Sangha-led programs, on poetry, spiritual saints and sages that Peter coordinates, and, mindful poetry, and just a whole range of other, storytelling and gardening, and I want to miss anything, but there's just a lot of great things happening. So if you're not part of the community, we'll give you all that information a little bit later. So anyway, getting into the class, welcome again, everyone. I'm Hugh Byrne. I've been teaching with IMCW for 20 years, and teach in our area, greater Washington area, but around the country as well, and some internationally too. And today I want to talk about kind of broadly about enlightenment or waking up, which is really the kind of the goal of the path, or the end of the Buddha's path. It's also a theme that's in many other spiritual traditions. I'm not going to range widely today around different spiritual traditions, but I want to focus today on a theme, and I'm just going to name it now, and we'll come back to it after the meditation. But the theme today is, I'm going to just kind of start from a definition of enlightenment, of waking up, provided by the Indian Christian, born in Bombay, Christian, 20th century Christian, spiritual teacher, but kind of very much kind of taking in the teachings of the East as well, Buddhism and other traditions there. And he defined enlightenment as absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And this has been a kind of a framing that has really appealed to me for a long time, with its kind of Zen-like, what does that actually mean kind of thing. And so what I want to do is kind of unpack that a little bit and talk about it generally, and unpack it and really just explore what it means, but most important, how it can help us concretely, really specifically in our own lives, how it can help us untangle ourselves from suffering. How really understanding the goal of the path. I focus mainly on the Buddha's path to enlightenment, to awakening, but it can be broadened out from there as well, as you see fit, as we see fit. And so that'll be the theme that we'll focus on today. And so we'll hopefully have some time for some sharing and some discussion around that. I'll be able to stay around a little bit after the formal ending of the class at 12. What we do is, we normally keep the the room open either for just informal discussions or for a continuation of the discussions of the class for those who want to continue to discuss and share afterwards. So I'll be around for maybe half an hour afterwards, and others I'm sure will join us. So with all of that, let me just say the format of the class is very straightforward. We typically begin with a meditation. Been changing that up a little bit recently, but I think today we'll begin with a 20-minute meditation, have a talk, hopefully around 30 minutes or so on this theme of enlightenment and absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And then Emily will lead us in some mindful movement. We'll be able to get into our bodies and some embodied mindfulness. And then we'll have some time for discussions and sharing, depending on how much time there is. And we'll finish with maybe a short meditation, a couple of minutes of meditation and some announcements. So with that, really want to welcome anyone who's joined us in the last few minutes. And we'll begin with a meditation. And just a word before we do that. I want to start with what the Buddha spoke about as gladdening the mind or gladdening the heart, consciously inviting kind of the opening of the heart, connecting with our emotions, connecting with our hearts, connecting with compassion and loving kindness and joy and other qualities. And one of the most helpful ways of gladdening the heart that I find is the practice of gratitude. Because all we have to do is just reflect on things in our life that we're grateful for. And, for many of us, I would say for most of us, there's more than a few things. I just look at people's backgrounds, maybe this background, which obviously isn't my actual background right now, but, just the nature, animals, loved ones, just so many things, our health, all the many, many things we have to be thankful for. And yet, when we're caught up in suffering, in stress and worry and fear and anger and all of those kind of things, then it's very hard for us to even access gratitude. So to be able to kind of consciously shift our attention to gratitude and say, let me just pay attention to some things in my life that I feel grateful for, and whatever it is for each one of us, then that can do what the Buddha spoke about as gladdening the heart. And when the heart is glad, and when the heart and the mind are glad, we're much more available and open to being with our experience. We're not in this fight or flight, shut down place. We're kind of tend to be in a much more open and spacious place. So that's just as a few words of introduction as we begin the meditation. So I invite you to begin by finding a comfortable, relaxed posture. So letting your back be straight, letting your hands rest wherever they're comfortable, in your lap or on your knees, hands facing up or down. Inviting the shoulders to relax. Letting your eyes close if that's, easy for you, that's comfortable for you to have your eyes closed, or keep them open with a soft, unfocused gaze. You could consciously just bring your attention into your body. You might scan your body from the head down through the face and down through the torso to the lower body to the feet, and just see if there's any area where you might be holding tension. that you might normally be unaware of. But as you pay attention, you might notice, oh, my shoulders are really tense, or my stomach muscles are really contracted, or there's a lot of tension around my mouth or my jaw or the facial muscles. So just as you move your attention through the body, you might just invite a relaxing of the body. The more the body is relaxed, the more the mind can be relaxed and at ease. And as you pay attention to the body, you might consciously let your breath deepen. Invite some longer, deeper breaths. Nice, full, deep breath. And just releasing, relaxing, letting go on the out breath. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. As we breathe in, we energize the body, and then as we breathe out, we relax the body. So the deeper breathing can be a really helpful way of just letting us settle and relax, be here now. And as I spoke of it just a few minutes ago, we might bring into your awareness just some things in your life that you feel grateful for. It might be loved ones, that support you and bring joy, happiness to your life. You might just bring individuals into your mind. Just take in your, if you can, just feel in your body, whatever that gratitude or that appreciation feels like. You think of a loved one, partner, a spouse, a child, a parent, other family member, or a dear friend, maybe a pet. You might just say a silent thank you, thank you. Just as much as you can, let your heart be open. And however it is, if you don't feel particularly open, that's fine too. It's not supposed to be a particular way, but this can be a really powerful way of opening our hearts, gladdening our hearts. Maybe people that are more difficult in your life that you could be grateful for too. People that challenge you, worth bearing in mind. Maybe not the place we mostly start, but they too help us grow, help us wake up. If we can use difficulty as a path of practice, path of waking up. You might just bring to mind other things in your life that you feel grateful for. Maybe it's a measure of good health, physical health, mental health. It might be just the wonders and beauty of nature, being able to be out in nature, appreciate the animals and the birds and the trees, the wind in your face. So many things in our life that we can be grateful for if we just shine the light of awareness on gratitude and cultivate, what some people call an attitude of gratitude, just a quality of gratitude. For me, it's hard to imagine my life without music, just the way music and songs and different kinds of music have really brought so much to my life. You might feel that, or it might be art, or it might be gardening, it might be many things. Just in your own way, and whatever really speaks to you, inviting that quality of gratitude, and just see what arises in the body and in the heart and in the mind. If a smile comes to your face, just appreciate the smile, which also helps to open our hearts, gladden the mind and the heart. Just take a couple more minutes if you like to, of just opening to whatever you feel grateful for. Share this from Jack Cornfield, his little book, The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness and Peace. With gratitude, I remember the people, animals, plants, insects, creatures of the sky and sea, air and water, fire and earth, all whose joyful exertion blesses my life every day. With gratitude, I remember the care and labor of 1,000 generations of elders and ancestors who came before me. I offer my gratitude for the safety and well-being I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the blessings of this earth I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the measure of health I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the family and friends I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the community I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the teachings and lessons I have been given. I offer my gratitude for the life I have been given. And now, if you like to, you might just open to whatever is arising in your experience right now, the body and heart and mind. Just inviting a receptive awareness of what's here. Just inviting the intention, the commitment to say yes to whatever is present, whatever's here right now. Maybe difficult or maybe easy, peaceful or more agitated. However it is, can you make space for it? Can you welcome the guests in poet Rumi's phrase or metaphor? Just letting whatever is present come, and just letting it be. And then when it's ready, letting it go. And if it's helpful, you can use the breath as an anchor or a home base, or you rest your attention on the breath just as it is. In breath, out breath. And when you notice the mind has gone off, as it will tend to do from time to time, sometimes quite often, just gently and kindly the body, to the breath, to this. We'll finish with this poem by Lynn Unger, The Way It Is. One morning you might wake up to realize that the knot in your stomach had loosened itself and slipped away, and that the pit of unfilled longing in your heart had gradually, and without you really noticing, been filled in, patched like a pothole, not quite the same as it was, but good enough. And in that moment it might occur to you that your life, though not the way you planned it, and maybe not even entirely the way you wanted it, is nonetheless persistently, abundantly, miraculously, exactly what it is. Take your time coming back into more external orientation awareness into the group, and just notice how you're feeling. Feel free. Just say this generally, and anytime you'd like to share anything, how you're doing or how you're feeling or what's going on for you, or if you have any questions, please feel free to put that into the chat. It'd be nice to it's always good to hear from folks. And again, if you're new, be nice to welcome you here as well. So again, welcome again to everybody, to our Sunday morning class. If you came after the opening, I'll just say again that the theme today I want to explore is the theme of enlightenment or awakening, or at least one kind of approach to it. And I'm not going to deal with the kind of the larger big picture and all the different theories out there and different spiritual traditions, but look at it mainly from a Buddhist standpoint, although I'm using a quote from a Buddhist friendly Christian priest who lived, I think, born in 1931, died in 1989, Anthony de Mello or Tony de Mello. He was born in India, and he, I think, at first was fairly kind of orthodox in terms of his, he was a Catholic priest, and so under the strictures of the Vatican, and he was within the party line, as it were. But then I think got more interested and more involved in Eastern spirituality and kind of merged that. And I think after he died, his teachings didn't go down so well with the previous Pope, who was then the head of the modern version of the Inquisition is. Sorry, I don't mean to be pejorative about this, but his teachings were somewhat questioned. Anyway, but his Tony de Mello, he defined enlightenment as absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And just stepping back a little bit, I mean, enlightenment, awakening is talked about, in many, many different spiritual traditions. And it's normally spoken about as something that's transcendent. It takes you from, the kind of the everyday, being caught up in, what in Buddhism, it's called samsara, and samsara translates as this kind of endless wandering, making the same mistakes over and over again, keeping, digging a hole and keeping digging, as it were, that we might kind of see a lot of, our life can be made up of a lot of that, of kind of like, oh, why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep? So enlightenment is where, we go beyond that, and in Buddhist terms, spoken about, the Buddha talked about it as nirvana, which really translates as really a quenching or like a putting out of a flame. And you could say, well, what flame is being put out? And the Buddha would say, it's the flame of greed, it's the flame of hatred, it's the flame of delusion. It's kind of like putting out a fire, and putting it out so thoroughly that it's not going to, the embers are not going to reignite and build up another fire from it. It's just like really, really eradicated the roots, the conditions that give rise to that. The fires of suffering, really, is how the Buddha spoke about it. And I'm starting from this, the Anthony de Mello's, and we'll look into it in some depth today, because I find it of articulation, a statement of this waking up to our, what in Buddhism would be called our Buddha nature. We all have that capacity for awakening within us, but we don't all access it. For many of us, many people, it's clouded over by a lot of confusion, a lot of ignorance, a lot of unconsciousness, basically, of not looking at what needs to be looked at. So we just play out these habitual, our conditioning and our habits, and we can cause a lot of suffering. We can experience a lot of suffering and often cause suffering to others as well. As we look out in the political world and in the global conflicts, we can see a lot of that being acted out in the world. And so this, this particular statement of enlightenment, as I mentioned, it has this kind of ambiguous quality. Enlightenment is absolute cooperation with the inevitable. But what I want to do, as I mentioned earlier, is I want to kind of unpack this a little bit, because I think it may be helpful in our understanding of awakening, but also of understanding of suffering in our own lives and how we can extract ourselves, untangle ourselves from suffering. So how we can use these teachings in practice. This is my hope in all these teachings, is it's just kind of see in our own lives, how can we use the teachings? How can we apply the teachings to our own lives and see, oh yeah, this is suffering and this is clinging. The Buddha said, one who understands clinging and non-clinging understands all of the Dharma. One who understands clinging and non-clinging understands all of the Dharma. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement. If you could say the Buddha's teachings, if you had to put it in one sentence, the way I would say it is, if you cling, you suffer. If you let go of clinging, you let go of suffering. And then you could say, well, you can let go completely, or you can let go a little bit, as Ajahn Chah speaks about. But that's kind of the essence of it. Clinging leads to suffering, letting go of clinging. And obviously it's a lot of unpacking of what do we mean by clinging, what do we mean exactly by suffering. But we know generally what that means. When we're caught up in, craving or aversion or different forms of unconsciousness, we experience it as suffering. We experience it as like, oh, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. This is, it feels like anguish. It feels like grief. It feels like unpleasantness. I don't like this. I don't want this. And so to untangle of like, how do we see this? How do we see our own role in it? How do we let go of it? And that's really what these teachings are all about. They're not about theories or concepts, except insofar as they help us in our own lives find our way out of suffering. That's the only thing that the Buddha, that's the most important thing, not the only thing. The most important thing the Buddha was concerned about. How do we free ourselves from suffering? And how could he, as a teacher, help thousands and down the ages, millions and possibly billions of people kind of untangle themselves from suffering? And part of my gratitude is a gratitude to the Buddha, to this historical person who kind of opened the door to all of this, and there's a lot of other wisdom teachings out there as well. But for me, this kind of encapsulates a path that really, a meaningful path that to help let go of suffering. So I want to just begin by by just saying generally what I think, absolute cooperation with the inevitable means, but then kind of unpack it a little bit more. In general, I think, what De Mello is saying, if enlightenment is absolute, cooperating with the inevitable, what he's talking about is being in a relationship of non-denial or non-resistance to our experience. So to what's happening. So not holding on to what we're wanting or pushing away what we don't like, but being in a wise, skillful relationship with our experience. Another way we can talk about it as saying yes to what is. And you're familiar with this from what I talk about, a lot when I teach, acceptance, and many, many other teachers talk about saying yes to what is. That the metaphor of welcoming the guests. You could see it also as like taking refuge in the truth. So we're approaching our experience, we're approaching what happens in an honest way, in a way we're not denying, we're not kind of pretending things are different than they are, we're not covering things up because, it's too uncomfortable to be with that. We're opening to our experience, and obviously acknowledging that sometimes our experience can be very, very intense, and we may need kind of very careful ways of doing that, or very gentle ways of doing that. It's not necessarily always diving into the center of the, the deep end, as it were, or the middle of the fire. Sometimes we need to, if there's trauma or if there's other, physical pain sometimes, or chronic pain, we need to go gently. But what we're doing is with, as another metaphor is just, in psychology, with expanding the window of tolerance, or whatever, expanding is the word, or whatever that exact, just making larger the window of tolerance so that we can open to more. At first it's not so easy, but then more and more. So it's really taking refuge in the truth. This is the first of the Buddha's refuges, taking refuge in the Dharma. Not struggling with reality, not being at war with the truth, with the way things are. And this is very counter to our habitual ways of being in the world, where we want what we want. Do you ever find you want what you want? We're kind of like, I want this, and we're moving towards it. And sometimes that's fine, it's fine to want what we want. But when it takes on that craving, that clinging, then it becomes more of a problem, in that we suffer with that. If we just, it'd be nice to have a nice walk this afternoon, or a nice meal this evening. But if we start saying, I've got to have it, it's got to be a certain way, it's got to taste just right, then we're kind of getting into that area of clinging. We're wanting things that we want, we're wanting to get rid of things we don't like, we're pushing them away. I think we're all familiar with, hopefully all, but most of us are familiar with that. And when things are not going the way we want them to, not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, what we experience is a kind of a gap between what we're wanting and what we're getting, and in that gap is dukkha, in that gap is suffering. Inherently it's there. If I'm wanting something, but I'm not getting it, and it has this clinging quality to it, I'm craving something, and I'm not getting it, then obviously there'll be suffering there. Because I'm wanting, but I'm not getting it. There's this gap here between the wanting and what I'm actually getting. And that gap really is experienced as suffering, as dukkha. So I want to just look a bit at the specific language of Anthony de Mello's description or definition of enlightenment: absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And I want to kind of look at each of the words, starting at the end, because we're cooperating with something, and he calls cooperation with the inevitable. In English, inevitable can have a kind of connotation of predestination, or something being foreordained, it had to happen. It was inevitable that it would happen. I think a better way of looking of talking about what he means by inevitable here is unavoidable. Unavoidable. In Spanish you have the word inevitable, and it has at the root evitar, which means to avoid. So unavoidable. So if you think of it in that way, we're cooperating with what is unavoidable. And what is unavoidable? What is unavoidable is always what's here. If you're sitting there where you are and you have a headache right now, that's unavoidable. As a singer said, if it's snowing in Brooklyn, I'd say snow's what we've got. If it's snowing, it's snowing. You might say, I don't want snow. I don't like snow. Why is it snowing? It's all questions you can ask. But the truth is, it is snowing. And so any path from suffering to greater awakening has to come through accepting that this moment is as this moment is. So whatever is here right now, in any moment, it could be, you're feeling tired, or it may be there's a family member who's struggling. That may be dealing with a challenging health condition. So that's a reality that you're dealing with if that's the case. It might be a nice sunny day. Okay, it's a sunny day, or it's a rainy day. It may be that you're happy that it's a sunny day. Then happiness is part of the what is. If you change something in the past, things in the present could be different, obviously, but we can't do that. We can't do it now. We might change things for the future, or maybe affect things for the future. But what is here is here. I mean, in a way, what I'm saying is very obvious, but it's not something we live with. I mean, we're doing the opposite. The present moment is showing up as it is. Our wishing it were different is ultimately going to have zero impact on how it is. Am I right? Or have you ever been able to, just through your mind, change night to day, a rainy day to a sunny day? We can't do it. I mean, I don't know how much spirit, the spiritual powers that people here might have, the more, what is it Shakespeare said, in Hamlet, I think, more in this world than we could, that we know about and we can imagine. I don't have the quote in my head, but so we can change, we can try and change things for the future, but even then we have to start with life as it is right now, and meet it with acceptance. And if we don't, we suffer. It's really guaranteed that when we fight with reality, we suffer. When we fight with reality, if we're in a struggle with, the colleague at work that you may find unkind or mean or, whatever, how much of the time do we get into fighting with reality? It's like, and I want to be very careful in saying we don't have to just be doormats or be passive. I'm not talking about that, because we can change things and we can talk to people about how they're acting. But ultimately, we can't, if that's how they're showing up in the world, that is how they're showing up in the world. If a politician is showing up as, well, however they're showing up in the world, that we don't like it, well, that's how they're showing up in the world. We might not like it, but that is how things are, how things are right now. We could actually turn de Mello's statement around and say suffering is non-cooperation with the inevitable, non-cooperation with what is. We suffer when we don't cooperate with reality. So we suffer when we fight with or resist reality, resist life as it is. And you could say the path to freedom comes from coming into alignment with life, with experience. And that's where we can come to this cooperation with life, cooperating with life. So what does it mean, taking this world, if we talk about inevitable as really what is? It's life, it's experience as it's showing up right now. What does it mean to cooperate with reality, with life? One of the things I really like about this term cooperation is that it captures well a sense of interaction with life. The co-with, cooperating, operating with. So it's an engagement with. It's not a one-sided thing. It's our experience, our attitudes, what we're bringing to it, cooperating with what is. And this, I think, is really, really important. It is for me because it really captures some of the central Buddhist teachings and some of the more challenging teachings about dependent origination. I'll say a few words about that in a minute. But just coming back to cooperation, interacting with life. I like the phrase as well from Philip Moffat uses it as a title of his book, Dancing with Life. It's an engagement with life. It's a dancing with life rather than, I'm here, life is here. And there's this kind of rigid relationship with it, and I've somehow got to do with it. It's like, it's much more like a dance, or at least potentially so. When we suffer, it's not like a dance. It's a solid me here, and a solid world out there, and a sense of a real separation between self and the thing, the world, reality, the other, etc. So we're in relationship with what's happening. In Buddhist teachings, this relationship, as I mentioned, is spoken of as dependent arising. Excuse me. Some different names for it, but they all kind of conjure up the same thing, sometimes called dependent origination. What this really means is that nothing arises or exists independently of other things. Nothing has an inherent existence. Everything is dependent on different conditions coming together. So each one of us is dependent on different conditions coming together. The conditions that give us life, our parents, that what helps, give birth to a child, all of that, we're coming out of these causes and conditions. We're not some independent thing. We look at nature, we see how everything is interacting. Nothing, you can't imagine a flower saying, oh, I'm a better flower than you are, to another flower. And yet we get caught up in this individualistic comparative, better than, worse than, same as, and we suffer in that, anytime we get into that kind of afflictive comparison, we suffer. So what's important here is that anything that happens, for example, getting some difficult health news when we go to our physician, primary care physician, say, or a specialist or whatever, we get some news that's difficult, painful. So, challenging in itself. That experience of what we're hearing and what we're learning, how the quality of our experience of that will depend on how we meet it. So if that physician, whatever, says to us this, and in the aftermath of that, we get into, oh my God, what's it going to lead to? And we'd start all this proliferation in the mind, as people may often do in terms of, difficult things, hearing difficult news about themselves or about others, loved ones, etc. Then it becomes a really painful and challenging experience. If you approach that experience, or any of us approach that experience with more equanimity, with more acceptance. It doesn't mean I'm not being Pollyannish and saying, oh, we can just be, ha ha ha, no big deal. Very challenging diagnosis, no big deal. No, but there's a difference. If we have some measure of equanimity, some measure of acceptance, okay, this is life unfolding. And then we can see, how do I engage with this in a wise way? How do I get the information I need to be able to make the best decisions I can? All of these things. Probably a number of folks in this class today have experienced something in this kind of ballpark for themselves or loved ones. So what we bring to an experience really affects the experience itself. If I respond to something, some news from a place of fear or anger, it's going to be a very different experience I'm having than if I meet that same information with acceptance and equity. Does that make sense? I mean, in a way, it's almost feels like a truism, but that's not something that I would say the majority of people appreciate. I think most people would take it as a given that, well, if you get that nose, then you're going to respond, however you are, whatever your tendency is. But what these teachings point to is that our response is not a given. We're not just a solid thing. Beneath everything, we have a capacity to train our minds. And so with training in meditation, in ethics, in virtue, in cultivating wisdom, a wise view, a wise understanding of the situation, cultivating the heart practices of loving kindness and compassion and self-compassion, that can help us to meet a situation or any experience in a very different way than we might habitually have done, So what I'm really saying here is if we cooperate with experience, we cooperate with life, we cooperate with whatever is arising, then we will suffer. Either we won't suffer if it is genuine cooperation with life. It might be difficult, could still be painful, but we won't have to experience suffering if we don't get into a fight with reality. And it may be it's a path of training, so we're not necessarily there at any given moment. But alternatively, we will experience less suffering than we otherwise would have, even if we experience some level of suffering. I was listening to some talks Eckhart Tolle gave just this week, actually, on a retreat in Norway. I wasn't in Norway, but I listened to watched them online, and he shared some news about his own experience in the last year or so, where he got a very, very challenging diagnosis of cancer, and he spoke about how he responded to it, and how for a short time had, here's somebody who was a very, very deep and awakened spiritual practitioner and teacher who, had some initial reaction, but after a short time was able, through his own practice and through his own kind of awareness and awakening, was able to actually sit with that. And he actually spoke about it as for a few days just living in this state of intense peace and well-being. You could say in spite of, but just in the face of that challenging situation. He also shared, just in terms of his life situation, that he was able to have an operation, and seems like everything went really well. So the diagnosis that could have been, a few months to live, or a year or whatever, may not, hopefully that isn't the case, but, maybe it's, but just from what he shared there. But that was, for me, was a very clear example of how different the same experience could be, depending on what we're bringing to it. And this is what really De Mello, I think, captures with this sense of cooperating with life. In that situation, you're not fighting with, oh no, I refuse to accept that I have cancer, or I have this, or, that would be stupid. But in a way, we do that kind of thing. We kind of like, no, I'm not even going to look at it. I'm not going to, however, we have all of these kind of defense mechanisms and escape mechanisms. So what we're cultivating is this willingness to cooperate with life, however life is showing up, as in Rumi's poem, Welcoming the Guests, So cooperation for me captures the sense that we're agents in the process, that our choices are a material factor. that we're not talking about passivity, as sometimes, sometimes this same notion is talked about as acceptance, accepting the situation, a situation. But acceptance can be challenging for people because it can sometimes conjure up, it's kind of passivity. Oh, I'm just accepting it. Oh, just accept it. Oh, yeah. But it really isn't about acceptance in the sense of passivity, because we can really engage. We can change what we can change. Obviously, if we have a very challenging health diagnosis, we can do whatever we can to be as well as we can, using Western medicine and Eastern medicine and whatever can really help us to be well and to heal and support our immune system and all of that. And for me, the serenity prayer really captures it well, that relationship. It has different wording, but what I like is something like, may I accept the things I cannot change, accept the things I cannot change, have the courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So acceptance, change, and discernment to know the difference between acceptance and change. So the wisdom to know the difference, for me, really speaks to our practice. Knowing when action to make change or to respond to a situation is wise and skillful, and when acceptance, when that's not possible, when it's not possible, we can't always do something about the situation that we're experiencing, the situation that we're facing, and in that situation, then what makes sense to do. And coming back again here to Eckhart Tolle, he says, in that situation, what we need to do is to surrender. And he says, if there is truly nothing that you can do to change your here and now, and you can't remove yourself from the situation, because sometimes that can be a choice. If there's difficult work situation, you might find a new job, etc. Then accept your here and now totally by dropping all inner resistance. This, he says, is called surrender. And he says surrender is not weakness. There is great strength in it. Only a surrendered person has spiritual power. Only a surrendered person has spiritual power. Through surrender, you'll be free internally of the situation. You may then find that the situation changes without any effort on your part. In any case, you're free. You're internally free in either case. So this cooperation with life, and just to say a final word, because I'm conscious of I've been going on a little longer than I intended, but the final word is absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And what absolute really means is full, total cooperation, not half-hearted, not bargaining. Often we bargain. I'll stay with this difficult feeling as long as it's gone within 5 minutes. So I kind of bargain. And that's not acceptance. And that's not cooperation. Tara Brach, in her first book, she called radical acceptance. And that's really what this is about as well. Radical means deep-rooted acceptance. Radix in Latin for root. Deep-rooted acceptance, deep-rooted cooperation. It's deep-rooted cooperation with reality, with life as it's unfolding. And that's the ground for awakening, for enlightenment, as well as, you can see it as meeting our experience with absolute cooperation with the inevitable is really the path to waking up. But you could also say it's the expression of an awakened life. Absolutely cooperate with life as it's unfolding. If any of us were completely awake, we would live in a way where we're cooperating with life, where we're dancing with life, where we're not fighting with the truth. So absolute cooperation with the inevitable is saying yes to life, to experience, whatever it is: pain, war, earthquakes, divisions, joy, love, compassion, beauty, all of this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Saying yes to everything. So what I want to do is to finish off for just 2 minutes, is just invite you, if you like, you could close your eyes, think about in your own life how you meet your experience, how you meet reality, particularly when things are difficult. I gave some examples, family member caught up in addiction, or you're fearful about what might unfold in the political realm, or you get a challenging diagnosis or a serious health condition, or you're working with a difficult colleague, or you're caught up in traffic, or you're on the phone with a customer service representative, becoming a bit of an oxymoron. How is it? I suppose I'd put it in terms of two questions. Where do you experience non-cooperation with the inevitable in your own life? Where are you not cooperating with life? Where do you find yourself in a struggle with how things are? And just kind of, in a kind, non-judgmental way, just bring awareness to that. Like, oh yeah, this is somewhere to pay attention to. You may already be very well aware of that. You might also think about where or when have you experienced saying yes to the inevitable, saying yes to what is here. Where you really were willing to say, yeah, this is difficult. I'm thinking particularly of difficult situations, and then say yes to it. I've shared in some talks about some changes that kind of I was able to make in my own life in the last year or two, in relationship to my dad, who died 40 plus years ago, and in my relationship to my son, who's in his mid-30s now. Just of letting go of looking at either of them through the eyes of judgment. And just kind of saying, oh, well, obviously with my dad who's passed on from this life, what sense would it make to hold on to anything, in that case? And with my son, of like, it's his life, so just to be accepting in however that his, choice is, and that don't necessarily have to agree with everything in anybody's life, but just to meet it with cooperation with what is. So just to invite, you in this, last minute or so to think about, where you've been willing and able to cooperate with the inevitable, and where things still feel sticky. And you might, in the days ahead, just give attention to that, to those questions. And what, it might make sense to make, if it would make sense to make a commitment to engaging in a particular way with what you might be pushing away. So thank you for your kind attention, everyone.